Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. This is Adiba Mehvish, a master's student of English literature. With this, we start with the first session of our conference, a National Interdisciplinary Online Student Conference on Trauma, Memory, and Post-Memory, where we will dive deep into the fascinating world of trauma, memory, and post-memory, where we will explore the intricate connections between past experiences and their impact on the present. The theme for today's session, under which we all have cuddled up 5 different papers, is politics, and the chair we have today is Dr. Siddharth Chakraborty. It is with great honor that we invite the extraordinary Dr. Siddharth Chakraborty, hailing from the enchanting city of Pune, to grace our conference session. With the stroke of a pen and the mastery of language, Siddharth sir has carved a path as an assistant professor at the prestigious Aligarh Muslim University. His academic journey, adorned with the jewels of knowledge, led him to the corridors of the renowned Jawaharlal Nehru University, where he completed his master's and PhD, solidifying his expertise in the realm of literature. His vibrant presence illuminates every discussion he participates in, infusing it with his infectious passion for literature. His insights, as vast as an ocean of ideas, will undoubtedly enrich our panel's discourse, sparking intellectual fires and igniting a deeper appreciation for the literary arts. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us today. But before we embark on this journey of knowledge and ideas, let me highlight a few important points for each presenter. Each presenter will be giving 12 precise minutes. Fear not, for an alert will remind you when your 10 minutes are up, leaving you with 2 more minutes to gracefully conclude your paper. But that's not all. Following each presentation, our esteemed chair will provide special remarks, adding a touch of wisdom and insight to the proceedings. And to keep the conversation flowing, the audience will have the opportunity to pose a question to further enrich the discourse. So without wasting any further time, let us dive into this intellectual feast where time is both our ally and our guide. Prepare to be captivated, inspired, and engaged as we embark on a journey of profound ideas and thought-provoking discussions. With that, I would like our first presenter, Miss Maliha Vese. Are you there?
Yes, I know.
Oh, okay. Miss Maliha is from Sophia Girls College, Ajmer, and the topic of her presentation is journalistic study of politics and politicization of memory in animal. Ma'am, please take over now. Thank you.
Thank you. Is my screen visible?
Miss Maliha, no, I don't think your screen is visible yet. No, ma'am, your screen is not visible yet.
Is it?
Ma'am, I request you to present your screen again because it's not visible yet.
Is it now?
No.
If I may just interrupt, if it's fine, you can just carry on and read your people.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Maliha Vase from MA English Literature, previous Sophia Girls College, Kashmir. And I'm going to present my paper on a journalistic study of politics and politicization of memory in Animal Farm. Due to time constraints, I will be focusing only on points in my paper. In order to understand the means through which memory is politicized in the text concerned, one needs to know what is politics of memory. Politics of memory is primarily concerned with memory that is molded by political agents and includes the ways in which events are recorded, remembered, manipulated, studied in order to fulfill political agendas. In Animal Farm, the agenda to be fulfilled are that of the pigs. This novella by George Orwell essentially concerns itself with the supposedly egalitarian Animal Farm turning into a totalitarian state, and memory plays an important role in the same. After overthrowing Mr. Jones, the animals take control of the manor farm, renaming it as Animal Farm. This is done with the ideas of Old Major, the white boar, in mind. The boar gave the animals the ideas of what came to be known as animalism throughout the novel. In the context of Animal Farm, the manipulation, persuasion, narrative techniques such as songs, slogans, and the commandments, renaming of places, and the abuse of language are the means through which memory is politicized. Since memory is a dynamic entity crafted and recrafted in dialogue with the political, social, and cultural imperatives of the present, in the novella, Napoleon and the other pigs recraft memory to suit the situations they want Animal Farm to be in. Not unlike any other work by Orwell, Animal Farm has what may be termed as the Orwellian use of language. The idea can be made clear by treating animalism as an ideological foundation of not just the farm, but of suppression and persuasion in itself. Two pigs, Snowball and Napoleon, structure animalism on the seven commandments so that animals can remember the basics of the ideology. These are altered to suit the needs of the pigs, now assumed leaders, as when the pigs start living in the farmhouse, the words with sheets are added to the commandment, no animal shall sleep in beds. Similarly, without cause is added to the commandment when Napoleon tortures and publicly kills the animals. And in order to satiate their desire to drink, the words to excess are added to another commandment by the pigs. In the end, there's only one commandment left. Quote, all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. Unquote. These changes lead to the private maxim of Boxer, quote, Napoleon is always right, unquote, being viewed as a complete truth by the rest of the animals. This manipulation is revealed to the readers when, in the middle of the night, Squealer is caught in the act of making changes to the commandments due to animals waking up by the noise he made while falling from the ladder. Snowball is a pig who initially worked with Napoleon and was a good orator and organizer. A part of organizing various committees and pitching the idea of windmill to the rest of the animals, he has even made the whole design of the windmill on floor. However, his presence in the novella changes when he becomes an imagined enemy due to his growing debates and arguments with Napoleon. Later, Napoleon takes the credit of the windmill as well. What is important to note, however, is the attempts made by the pigs to establish Snowball as a traitor, including establishing Snowball as someone who was in league with Jones on along. When Squealer says, quote, I could show you this in his own writing if you were able to read it, unquote. The use of a particular person or class of people as an imagined enemy is not something new to human history. In Nazi Germany as well, Jews were labeled as enemies and an inferior race in order to fulfill Nazi agendas. While Napoleon is the one who wants to manipulate the memories of animals in order to persuade them into believing him, it is Squealer who is the means through which he achieves the same. Considering Squealer's role in the novella, it would not be incorrect to view him as a diplomat of the government by Napoleon, who constantly changes facts and figures, manipulating collective memory in the process. Squealer usually prepares a list of increase in produce and fed these figures into the brains of animals with the constant question, quote, surely, comrades, you do not want Jones back, unquote, projecting Jones' leadership as undesirable state to be in. Throughout the course of the novella, he manipulated the events of the Battle of Cowshed to project Snowball as an ally of Jones and rewrote the commandments as stated earlier. Orwell writes, quote, now when Squealer described the scene so graphically, it seemed to the animals that they did remember it. At any rate, they remembered that at the critical moment of the battle, Snowball had turned to flee. Unquote. This constant redefining of the events is not new to human history as well, as the questions put up on experiences due to the lack of written documents. The animals, despite having poor memories, remembered a forbidding trade with humans, only for Squealer to convince them that no such resolution existed due to the lack of written records. A similar attempt was made to undermine testimonies of 5 Kenyan people in 2009 when they demanded reparations from the British government for human rights abuses they endured in 1950s when Kenya was under the British rule, only for the Operation Legacy to be revealed during the court proceedings. It was revealed that the British officials had destroyed crucial information about their colonial past with the idea of sinning quietly in mind so that Britain is not held accountable for the abuses endured by the people of its colonies. This was an attempt at recreating history
Ma'am,
and politicizing memory through the
sorry
lack.
for interrupting, but 10 minutes over, you have 2 more minutes to complete the paper.
Okay. Some other means of politicization of memory were narrative techniques employed by the pigs. Beasts of England gave the animals the dream of a better future. Banning the song was an attempt to politicize memory by annihilating. I'm sorry. Uh, by annihilating all memories of the revolution. The poem of Napoleon is an attempt to establish him as an unerring leader. And the bleating of slogans by the sheep is a repeated attempt to not just suppress opposition, but constantly project the views that government want the animals to remember. Places of memory, however, interestingly serves a dual purpose in the novel. In the beginning of the novella, Jones's house was preserved as a museum only for the pigs to inhabit it. Similarly, Jones's gun that was left behind in the Battle of Cowshed, the green flag with a horn and a hoof that was later painted green, or the skull of Old Major were all relics of an old time that were attempted to be remolded. When Napoleon kept the skull of Old Major near his pedestal, it was an attempt to establish himself in the same league as the revered old pig. Once he had this purpose, the skull was discarded. Similarly, the memories of animals are politicized by controlling modes of communication and the flow of information by making Squealer a moderator between Napoleon and other animals, making only one side of information accessible to the rest of the farm, which is what one may call state-generated, highly partisan fake news in the modern era. Thus, the already bad memories of the animals are politicized in Animal Farm through these means. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your wonderful paper. Now, I'd like to invite our chair to give remarks on the paper which ma'am has just presented. Siddharth, sir?
Yes, so a wonderful paper and on a novel that I think a lot of us would have read or would have sort of gone through. It's there and it's very popular in the syllabus. And memory is, of course, one of the things which have just come into the discourse of the last 2 years. I believe a lot of work is happening on memory studies. But I had a couple of questions. The first is, you've spoken about the text, and you've spoken about how within the text, different factions are sort of generating and rewriting history, right? So that's one thing. And also, you're sort of suggesting that, see, memory is a little different from what really happened in the past, and can be manipulated much more easily, which is a well fair given point. But the text itself is a rewriting of history, right? Because in reality, of course, Animal Farm is not really about pigs and horses and other animals and human beings. That is not really the story. There's a background story to it, and the way in which the story has been re-narrated is also a heavily politicized sort of a rendering of a very interesting bit of Russian history. And the author, as we know, is a famous socialist author who was actually taken to task. He was hauled up, put up, and he was almost sent to prison. And he gave out a list of some 40, 50 leading intellectuals, declaring them to be Soviet spies. So he's somebody who actually participated in the witch hunt of intellectuals in his own age. So, given the context in which this novel was written, leaving aside the literary direct allusions, which you have sort of pointed out, that's fine. How would you place the text in history, in its own context? So that would be my question. So, I hope that made sense. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, sir. And like you said, it's basically an allegory of an important part of Russian history. Uh, I look at it as a retelling of something, just like the animals in Animal Farm wrote songs and kind of like tried to make the idea of revolution palatable to other animals through the commandments or through beasts of England, or even later they tried to justify the leadership of Napoleon through the poem. Just like that, I think Orwell tried to make to show the world what was going on in Russia through this work by making it palatable to the readers. Personally, I feel that even the text politicizes memory because it's representative of what actually went on in history, but it's also politicized in a way that you can relate it to like multiple other things as well. So it's kind of it renders from actual human history, but at the same time it's not restricted to it.
All right, that's wonderful. What would you make of, let's say the 10 Commandments? What would be the actual historical sort of equivalent in Russian history? Was there any such 10 Commandments?
I'm sorry, so it's not something that I'm aware of.
Right. What about the song "The Beasts of England"? What is the equivalent in history? What is being rewritten at this point? Right. The point I'm trying to make is that this text is already rewriting history, right? And is playing around with memory in other ways. It's a good paper. Thanks a lot for your presentation. I think we can move on to the next presenter, perhaps, or if the floor can be open to questions right now, if that is what you want. Over to you, Adiba. How would you like to do it? Would you like to open it to the others?
Yes, so the actual sequencing was that remarks will be
Yes, so
given right
wonderful.
now,
So
then
let's
there
just
will be.
open it to the audience. Let's just open
Yeah,
it to
yeah.
the
So
audience. Any questions?
if there is any question from the audience, you can write them in the chat box, or you can directly unmute yourself and ask the question now. Do we have any question from Ms. Walika Vasina? I'm sorry. Okay, so I don't think we have any questions now. We'll move ahead to our second paper presenter, Devyani Mukherjee and Kishore Kumar Banerjee, who is going to present the paper. Oh, okay.
We
Thank you so
both
much.
will be presenting. Yeah, we both will be presenting.
Okay. Thank you so much. The topic is exploring the anthropological and psychological aspects of India-Pakistan partition migrants in modern context.
Yeah.
Ma'am, also would like to invite you now to present the paper.
Shall I present?
Yes, you can go ahead and present.
Good afternoon to all and on present here. I am Devyani Mukherjee and my research paper, as said by Adiba, revolves around the topic of exploring the anthropological and psychological aspects of India-Pakistan partition migrants in modern context, which means we have tried to look into the anthropological as well as the psychological areas of the migrants of the India-Pakistan partition. The partition of 1947 was perhaps one of the brutal incidents in the history of mankind, leading to the spontaneous displacement of several innocent people in a jiffy of moment. This incident was perhaps a blot in the history of mankind. So, keeping in mind the refugees and the migrants of partition who came from Pakistan to India and vice versa, me and my co-author Kishore Kumar Banerjee selected the affected people and did a survey on them. These people were not only Indians but also Pakistani and Baluchis. Now, the methodologies that were used were face-to-face informal interview and questionnaire via Google Forms. So, the questions involved were name, gender, religion, original place of residence of your ancestors before partition, current place of residence of your ancestor after partition, what were the issues your ancestor faced during or after the partition, how has partition affected you and your family, and what kind of trauma regrets you all are facing today. Do you wish to visit or return to your native land where once your ancestor lived? Now, the responses of the people that we recorded were, as you can see in this slide, all the migrants were unhappy about the fact that they have to move to an alien place all of a sudden without any prior notice. They had to leave all of their possessions behind. Now, the anthropological aspects. So, as far as the anthropological aspects are concerned, what we found was that not only Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs were affected, but minorities and communities like Shias and Sikris were also affected. A mass conversion also took place. Many became Muslims and many became Hindus and Sikhs. Women were severely affected in this process because the women were raped, abducted, and tortured, as well as a recovery operation was launched that aimed to bring back these women who were abducted or left behind. Those who were left behind in Pakistan got converted into Islam. Now, the cultural and material heritage were also lost because there were many people who had to leave their ancestral properties, leave their golden bangles. There were many musical instruments that they have to leave behind. And we also found that Lahore, Multan, and Sindh and Delhi also became the hub of immigrants and migrants because from both sides of the border, from Lahore, Multan, and Sindh, the migrants came and settled in Delhi, while many went to Lahore and Multan. Now, for the psychological part, my co author will continue.
Good afternoon, all. So, as far as the psychological aspect is concerned, we found very much peculiar behavior in these people, some of which were like these people suffer from unintentional or intentional recalling of these memories. Second thing is that these incidents have left the people with a permanent imprints of these horrible moments, which they are unable to forget. Third number point is that they are suffering from various psychological disorders such as psychosis, schizophrenia, hyperarousals, nightmares, flashbacks, and these all fall under the category of unintentional recalling of the memories. Now the thing is that as far as we can conclude our findings, we can conclude that in a nutshell, it can be said that these migrants are carrying traumas and grief till date, along with which remembering the good and bad old times that they have spent in their native places. Somewhere in their mind, it's still like that we want to go to our native homeland, but we cannot, and these memories cannot be uninstalled or like cannot be erased completely, and these memories haunt them. And there are some traumas also which cannot be erased. For example, the trauma of leaving their ancestral home and properties, the trauma of sitting in an alien land leading to cultural shock, the trauma of losing their closed ones and loved ones, the trauma of not being able to get back to their native lands, and the trauma of being uh, betrayed by their family member, by their neighbors and all. And this was the result and conclusion. And thanking you all for being patient and listening to us. And thank you for providing us this opportunity to present our paper. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kishore and Devyani, for presenting the paper. Now I would like to request our chair to give remarks.
Right. I really found your title and your abstract very promising. Could you please share your what is your sample size and how did you go about collecting these oral testimonies? Because you're claiming you're collecting them from across borders, right? So how did you collect your testimonies and how did you order them? Could you just shed some light on that?
Sir, for this, it was personally I did this, and I texted people on Instagram and found them from there only. So, and I requested them to fill the forms, and they were very eager to fill the forms, and they were Pakistanis and Baluchis.
That's wonderful. I mean, one of the beauties of course, using digital technologies is that you can very easily sort of connect across borders and other things. But how did you really verify these accounts? And because this is apart from apart from the fact that there's a lot of there's not a lot of veracity to a lot of things on the internet. Did you make some other attempts apart from the digital to sort of cement your study?
No, sir, I restricted to social media accounts only. And I asked about them and got an introduction about them. Then I confirmed that yes, they are Pakistani and they are now my friends also.
Wonderful. The
Yeah.
second thing I want to ask is the results that you have got. Most of the results are on very expected lines, right? From what we would have already read about in partition fiction and so on. Can you give me one or two examples of things you've heard or testimonies that you've heard which would deviate from the expected narrative of the partition as we have already studied in literatures and in texts? I'll
Sir,
simply
there
ask, can you give me one of the results about which are counterintuitive, which are not what you would expect? Yes, thank you.
sir, there was a woman. She was my family friend only. She said ki, her grandparents had to leave their home, and her grandmother was pregnant at that time, so she had to forcefully leave her two storied ancestral property in Lahore, and then she came to Meerut. She was pregnant at that time, and then she had to move within 15 days in Delhi. So this was something which traumatized me personally.
All right. Thanks a lot. Also, another thing. So, how did you divide the work? I mean, you're doing collaborative research in social sciences. Why did you decide to collaborate and not sort of do this on your own?
So because I thought there is some psychological aspect also. because as Kishore mentioned that there are various traumas there. They are bearing very like several griefs, several pain. So I thought to collaborate with him because he could have
Just
this.
introduce yourself. Where are you from? That sort of got
Sir, I'm from Delhi. I'm from Delhi.
from Delhi, and which university?
Pardon, sir?
Which university are you from?
Sir, from IGNU.
Okay, you are wonderful, wonderful.
Yes.
Could we move on to the next?
Sure, sir. Moving ahead, we'll move on to the next presenter from Sharda University, Noida. And it's Lalruat P. Lianha. And I'm really sorry, I'm 100% sure that I'm pronouncing your name wrong. But I'll just introduce the topic of the paper, which is tracing the traumatic impact, exploring the psyche of children during the Mizoram insurgency in When Blackbirds Fly through narrative perspective. Can I please have you on the screen? Thank you so much, ma'am. Ma'am, you can present your paper now.
Yes.
Also, I would like to know the correct pronunciation of your name.
Okay. Is my screen visible?
No, screen is not yet visible. Are you sharing the screen?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think it's visible yet. Ma'am, your screen is visible now.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Larwat Pui, and this is my title. So, When Blackbirds Fly is a historical novel written by Hanala Henry, which was published in the year 2022. And it is based on the historical event which happened during the 1960s, the Mizoram insurgency, which is a 20 years long insurgency, also the darkest period of Mizoram. And the novel is set in the specific year of 1966 with the specific incident of the bombing of Aizawl by the Indian Air Force. And it illustrates the adversity faced by the ordinary people using the viewpoint of a child. And the unnamed protagonist is initially indifferent towards all the situation and all the politics and social issues, and he firmly expresses this interest towards it. But eventually, as the events unfold, he is forced to confront his beliefs and take a stance. And on a brief historical background of the Mizoram insurgency, the MNF, Mizo National Front, is a political organization which was established in 1961 led by Lil Denga, advocating for the independence of Mizoram from India. After India gained independence, Mizoram, formerly part of Assam, faced its own challenges as a marginalized region. And in 1959, the Mautam famine struck Mizoram, plunging the community into a dire state. And this Mautam famine is characterized by an outbreak of flowering and subsequent mass reproduction of bamboo, which led to an explosive increase in the rodent population. And the sudden abundance of rodents caused widespread destruction of crops and vegetations and resulting a severe shortage of food. So they have they even forewarned the government about this. However, due to the inadequate response to the government, it led to the emergence of this Mizo National Front. And it can be said that the insurgency stemmed from the political and social and economic grievance of the Mizo people who felt marginalized and oppressed within the Indian government. And lasted for 20 years, from 1966 to 1986. And during this period, and atrocious activities like burning house, killing, harassment, rape, and other tragic occurrences happened. But as mentioned before, the novel is only bound within that year, 1966, the bombing of Isol. And coming to the novel, novel, as mentioned before, explored the impact of the armed conflict on the life of the ordinary citizens. And the novel is set in the 1966, where the story is navigate through the lens and angle of the little boy. And also, the title "When Blackbirds Fly" serves as a doorway into the narrative, offering insights into the themes and experience. It can symbolize darkness or disrupted sense of peace, loss of innocence. And the author's narrative style combines the vivid storytelling with compassion through a cultural lens rather than a political lens. And through the rich imagery introspective monologues, readers are able to empathize with the character's struggle. And coming to the dramatic impact, here are the two excerpts from the novel. The former one is the utterance of the main protagonist, the protagonist's utterance. I'm barely concerned about what is happening. Somehow I'm fed up of all the talk about independence and everything. Father walking around the house, listening to Rini talk, sitting with grandfather. The world is perfect for me that way. My world is small, but I'm free. I'm independent, and that's all that matters. But towards the end of the novel, the protagonist uttered, "I no longer feel like a boy who loves life. I feel old like father and grandfather and many old people who have lost someone." This is when towards the end, when he lost his best friend due to the bombing, and he witnessed so many violence. And the protagonist's statement reflects a profound transformation in the perspective and identity. And the sentence highlights how the dramatic experience endured throughout the novel have forced the protagonist to confront harsh realities. And the sentence underscores the lasting effects of trauma on one's sense of self and outlook on life and robbing the innocence. And here are the role of the narrative and psyche. Um, the novel, to understand the dramatic impact, used narrative and delving into the protagonist's psyche. And also, by adopting a first-person perspective, the narrative provides an immersive experience that allows the reader to grasp the depth of the protagonist's struggle and enduring consequences of trauma, and allows the readers to form a strong emotional connection. And the intimate exploration enhance the authenticity of the story, enabling a profound understanding of the emotional and psychological toll, the conflict that it had on children. And the protagonist's vivid description of nightmares and recurring memories provides an authentic glimpse into the psychological challenges that he faced, allowing the readers to empathize with their traumatic experience. Here is an excerpt from the novel. This is him saying his dreams. "I was all alone in a vast dry land. I looked around and there was no one in sight, not even a single human being." And on theoretical framework and methodology, trauma theory and psychological theory provide frameworks to understand the psychological impact of.
Ma'am, I'm really sorry for interrupting, but you have 2 more minutes to wrap up your presentation.
Okay, let me just jump to the conclusion. The research sheds light on the dramatic impact of misogyny on the children, emphasizing the psychological and emotional toll it had on their well-being. And also, it underscores the significance of adopting the cultural lens and understanding the experience of the individuals and communities affected by the conflict, and going beyond political narratives to explore the nuance of identity and resilience. Okay, that's all for my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. With that, I request Siddharth sir to give remarks on the paper. So,
Right, Lalratli, it's a wonderful text that you have chosen, and of course, absolutely, very, very sort of curtain, history of a part of the nation that many people can't even point on the map even today, right? So, and most people would not know about this recent history of Mizoram at all. But just for the rest of the audience, could you talk a little bit about what sparked off the famine in the first place? Because there's a very peculiar sort of a famine which is sort of endemic to that location, right? It does not happen in many other places, and it has a very strange ecological root. So if you could sort of talk a bit about that. And the second thing is, what do you make of this sudden the shift from, or the rather, the way in which the history is also now being rewritten, this very direct shift from, let's say, starvation to violence, right? Which is what erupted and then dragged on for almost 20 odd years, I believe, 20, maybe 25 years, right? And the repercussions of that entire movement still determine mesopolitics today, and also politics in neighboring states to a large extent even today. So if you could just sort of link up these three for the rest of our audience as well as me, that would be wonderful. It's a very interesting text. I would really encourage all of you to read it, because if you don't read this text, you won't really understand what's happening. But it's a wonderful piece of writing which all of you must go through. So that with that, I'm also leaving the floor open for other questions. Right? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. A Mautam famine is a cyclic phenomenon that occurs approximately every 50 years in Mizoram and other parts of Northeast. And then the community had already faced this famine during the British colonialism, and then they forewarned the Assam government about this, but then they turned it down, stating that it's just a superstitious belief of the tribal. And then the famine hit hard, and then the community who already felt marginalized, they form Mizo National Famine Front first, and then after the famine, it was turned into a political party, Mizo National Front. Sir, what was the other question?
No, you sort of got it. See, what I wanted to point out. So this thing is, we have this strange idea of valid knowledge sources, right? So, and like if something comes out of Oxford, right, everyone is going to jump on top of it and say this is wonderful knowledge. So what the Mizo people knew already was that there was some link between bamboo flowering, and you can correct me if I'm missing the point, because I might be not getting the exact nuances, right? But they already knew this, and they actually presented to the government that, see, the bamboo flowering season is going to come, and it happens in every cycles of 50 years, and this is something that was preserved in the memory of the local people over millennia, right? So they knew this was going to happen, so they went and said, do something about it. People thought this was superstition. The only reason people thought this was superstition was because there's a privilege regarding who knows and who does not know in the hierarchy of knowledge in any space, right? So they thought, oh my god, these are people who are living in the hills, they don't know anything, we are the people who know everything, whatever, right? So on and so forth. And it turns out that there was a huge famine, right? And the situation was so bad that no sort of famine relief really worked, right? And that immediately sort of pushed people to try and find, people are just scrounging for grain, right? And the response of the state was really unusual, because I don't think even the Britishers, when the last famine happened, responded the same way as the government did at that time, which was to bomb its own people, which is where the title comes from. It's a beautiful cover, if you look at the cover, and the entire thing is being recounted from a child's perspective. So really wonderful piece of text. It's I think that you can do many things with it. You can read a lot. You can use a lot of lenses to sort of read this sort of a text, but a very powerful and moving text. I'll sort of I think we are going to run out of time if I just keep on talking. So we must move on to the next speaker, and then perhaps we can take questions collectively from the house at the end, if you have sort of got some more things straight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your remarks. And since Sir just mentioned that it is a really wonderful text, I'll repeat the name of the text again, which she has used. And the name of the text is When Blackbirds Fly. So if anyone wants to refer back to it, you can just go and note down the text, or you can check it anytime afterwards. With that, we'll move ahead to our next presenter, Sayan Kandil. Are you there? And I hope I'm pronouncing your name right.
Yes, I am there. My audience.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. He's from the Sanskrit College and University, and he'll be presenting a paper on ethno-religious identity, cultural violence in memoir. Sir, I request you to present the paper now.
Thank you. Good afternoon,
Thank you,
everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you're perfectly audible.
The title of my paper is Ethno-Religious Identity, Culture, Violence, and Memories. Amartya Sen, in his book Identity and Violence, The Illusion of Destiny, writes about the plurality of identity. On the one hand, identity becomes a source of pride and joy.
I'm
But
sorry, you're not audible at all, Shan. You'll have to sort of.
Yes, what's starting
can I? There is some problem. Can I
Is this a
close
network
the?
from your end?
I'm audible right now.
Switch your camera off, Shan. It's not. Yeah, it's not required. Yes, that may reduce the load on the system.
Am I audible
Am I
right now?
audible clearly?
Hello. Hello. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible now. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible, Professor.
All right, let's carry on. Yes, carry on.
Yes. Amartya Sen, in his book Identity and Violence, The Illusion of Destiny, about the duality of identity. On the one hand, identity becomes a source not merely of pride and joy, but also strength and confidence. On the other hand, identity can kill and fill with abandon. The claim against ex-religious minority groups, we Muslims in China, Xinjiang, and Muslim in Myanmar, Rakhine, against the destruction of religious and cultural sites reflected in these two states. So, on the cultural and religious side, the cultural distinctiveness of groups and their way of life. Here I will analyze the issue of cultural value as presented in the selected ethnic survival space. No escape in 212 and chief witness South to Uyghur memoirs and Arabic memoirs. Habibur Rahman is titled First the Erased Names. Along with the religious sites such as mosque and madrasa with Islamic schools, that I will also highlight religious and cultural symbols, sacred books, suppressed in both the regions. The ethnic languages also become site violence as the perpetrator banned the use of any ethnic language, any institution. All these contribute to the formation of community collective identity through shared modes. These are not just physical manifestations of society, rather they contribute to the community's social cultural fabric and create a link between the community past, present, and future. The perpetrator demolished and these very sites and to dehumanize the community, to take the individual memory, ultimately destroy their rights to the land. The perpetrators once clean a landscape from any group that bear the traces of a different ethnicity and a different religious, cultural identity. Yes, Rakhine State, China Xinjiang province is a great Islamic settlements, including mosques, cemetery, etc. Buddhist community in Myanmar led the Rohingya Muslims as a threat to the country's regional stability because of their religious belonging. According to various international human rights reports suggest the security forces accompanied militant organizations conduct demolitions of the religious structures in Arakan. Amnesty International writes that the past years in Myanmar have seen a religious intolerance and fueled by hardline Buddhist groups directed particularly at Muslims. The majestic Cathy Caruth mosque built in 1433 Arakan is destroyed in 1996 by Buddhist military. The mosque was proof of Buddhist and coexistence in Arakan from historical time. Regarding the destruction of this mosque, Habib Rahman wrote in his memoir, it was an illustrious moment with a history that superseded our national government. It was a memory that had to be erased. The Sadiq Mosque in Arakan was erased from the landscape This stolen by school with the control of Buddhist extremists. The Rohingya Muslims are largely accused of operating are false accused of operating extremism, terrorism, for which they are many of these mosques center. Facebook post spreads the false rumors about the link of the mosque to jihadist activities. On the basis of false allegations of this kind of allegations, many local mosques were dismantled and burnt down by the Russians, while the state itself confiscated the land of mosques to build new things, or turned mosques into camps. The land of mosque in Arakan, as you find in the text, is confiscated to build the cultural, administrative, or buildings. Like Indian in China is also right with religious persecution, marginalization, and Article 56 of Constitution of China grants freedom of religious practices. However, the Muslims in Singh the constitutional right. Uyghurs and other minorities here in Islam viewed as a source of Islamic political threat. The state bulldozing mosques and many have been shut down. In the text note escape, there is a reference to the destruction of Catholic mosque in Khabar of Xinjiang. The satellite of the mosque which was standing tall in December 2018 is no more in the April 2019. Many mosques closed down after 2000 protests. The Muslim sanctuaries, which the community regarded in high esteem, are destroyed new administrative building and passing laws. We cannot follow religious rituals and practices such as Ramadan, etc. They are forced to follow the Chinese party official force to renounce their religious chant of the Communist Party of China. In no case, the camp forced Jumra, a Uyghur, to abuse their religion. Jews were supposed to acknowledge the new God of China. The Muslims could not even keep Quran, Book Islam, and other religious things like prayer mats with them. All these are banned themselves. And raids would be conducted by state security neighborhood committees members to find out whether any family possesses this bank bill. They found the house of the family members detained for many years. At James' report, so how the official document Chinese Communist Party depicts Islam as a plague, and Muslim communities must be cured from the plague through a proper training in the re-education camp. The re-education involves the extremization and Islamicization of these Muslims. No case, Jumrat described given and find that a drain has been blocked the piles of soggy Quran and prayer mats which the families have been flushed down in countries. In Xinjiang, in beer wearing long dresses for women using haircuts following an Islamic ritual are considered to be grave offense, leading to torture and imprisonment. This is a part of China's synthesization process to create a homogeneous society. There is a state control rate against all these Islamic religious groups. In the chief witness, we come across a 7-year-old woman whose beard was forced to remove when a video shows that a artificial appearing of an older big Muslim woman. Example, all the three brothers of women
Sir, I'm really sorry to interrupt. You have 2 minutes to conclude.
The process of cultural assimilation extends to discrimination languages of ethnic communities values the principles of providing equal rights to the practice of the ethnic cultural linguistic identities as it states the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of persons belonging to national or ethnic religious linguistic minorities. The Rohingya Muslim community, their languages are systematically suppressed in the region. Previous speech to the Rohingya school for communication in Rohingya language means bordering on citizens. First, the erasure of human rights, Rohingya Muslims speak of the language, the result is I take over a brutal torture. The discrimination of language in educational institutions is the case with the Uyghur Muslims in Singapore also. The suppression of Uyghur is acted through the Sinicization process which promotes Mandarin as the national language of China. The restriction of the rights ethnic language values the 1949 CCP's constitutionally preserved linguistic rights of minorities in China. landscape, we come to know that China has implemented a new law which restricts the assignment of the teaching posts in the school only to the Han Chinese people. In the chief mentions neutrality of the system as a children's mouth in the school is started with big that they cannot speak their ethnic language in the school. It also imposes pandering from kindergarten to the highest level of education.
Thank you so much, sir. With that, I would like to invite Ajay to add some remarks to speak. So,
Right, very interesting set of texts, and again a very sort of a disturbed region in Asia, which has very little coverage in that sense, and is obviously under severe repression. Right, so you know, uh, I wanted to ask, uh, many of the techniques for controlling, let's say, cultural expression and the way in which cultural expressions and traditions also hold on to memory, you suggest seem to be rooted in religion, and as such are obviously located in some sort of a building or a point or a spot, right? uh, um, however, there are many cultural expressions which are not located, they're necessarily dislocated, the oral traditions. uh, what would you make of, let's say, the oral traditions of shlokas and shrutis, which form, let's say, the Hindu cultural memory? Do you think that the nature of Hindu culture allowed it to sort of, sort of collect itself in a more cohesive fashion to, let's say, occupation over long, long many years as compared to other cultures? What would you make of it? Because your argument seems to be that it's located, that location is being attacked, and that is what is causing the problem.
Please explain a little bit. Can, what I found find from your question is the oral culture. If this is an oral culture, then what will be the location of attack? Or
I mean, it's harder to attack a oral culture because it's already there in the multitude, right?
yeah, but even then, if I give example from the text, even the oral culture, the Uyghur or Rohingya people are also praised because they are using artificial intelligence and they are identity, they are collecting phones and other electronic vehicles, and they are incorporating various apps inside, so they can trace anything, any Arabic word or any particular Uyghur culture that is not much religious. Or that example, someone say in he or her communication, Assalamu alaikum, and found in the text, that is the artificial intelligence detect that. And on the basis of that, the person in change, then torture. This is also happening with Rohingya. And for oral culture, yeah, to a certain extent, it is hard to act. If in this, if you compare something like China in a region, then yeah, it will be a little bit easier. Again, even in that case, oral culture, yes, tough to act. Am I right to point out?
Right. Thank you for your points. I mean, in a different sort of a way, trauma and destruction and memory have also been used by the Chinese to present their own nationalism. Right. So, for example, the narratives of Nanking, particularly the Japanese atrocities on Nanking, become a central feature of Chinese nationalism. Right. To that extent, even Bangladesh bases its identity largely on the traumatic, sort of experience of the language imposition, and then how they claim that Pakistanis or Urdu speaking people, sort of did systemic atrocities on Bengalis, right? That's the claim by the state. Do you believe that invocation of trauma is essential for creating identity?
That to a certain extent, if if I give you an example, when I was discussing this with a professor on a at university, that they suppose they discuss the more that is that much interesting. But when someone victim community or opposite community attacks more, then suddenly or at the time suddenly it becomes an incident. It, it, this kind of actually what trigger community. Already, it's already there. Or no tension or act is already there. And this time I have just to trigger the moment, bring the animals further. For trauma, it's very ambiguous, not multi-dimensional, not so linear. For example, there was a space in the text, it is their name. I mean, they were comfortable with each other, with each community region, but they are that much religious thing. One religious and consider ethnic animosity grew or increased in the region, that they get to traumatize, get to be the surroundings, and they became identity. And they one case they longer remains that much comfortable to assert their identity. Yes, they did not when religious or cultural identity is attractive, simultaneously get traumatized. So to certain extent, trauma becomes physical elements to assert your instead of trauma. And you can see these people are following their culture, religion, the language for a lot of times. When someone attack or praise river, they become very scared of their existence because this in community is closely related to historical roots. And, we could take the grandmother of the author who described that this was the most where people main will came to pray, and children used to pray when many were said these are enshrined in the tombs, and once destroyed, yes, they thought that their memory, they will to the everything is lost, and when this is lost, they became more aware of the its importance.
Sir, I'm really sorry for interrupting, but due to the restriction of time, I guess we'll have to move ahead to the next participant. We'll come to your question towards the end of the session. I hope that's fine with you.
Yes, let's move on, right? Okay, thanks a lot for your response, Shan. Let's just move on to the next presenter. Thank you.
Sure. So the next presenter we have is from B.R. Ambedkar University, Delhi, Vidya Vishwakarma, and her topic is reading memories of the disabled experience in No Looking Back. With that, I would like to invite Vidya Vishwakarma. Are you there? Thank you so much, ma'am. Kindly present the paper. Is the screen visible? No, ma'am. Are you sharing your screen? Your screen is not visible yet. Yeah, just a second. Is it visible now? Yes, yes. It is visible.
I'll just start.
Thank you.
A very good afternoon to everyone present here. This is Vidya Vishwakarma here, and today the title of my paper is Reading Memories of the Disabled Experience in No Looking Back. So to begin with, I'll first like to talk about the population of people with disability, and I'd like to quote the data from WHO. The exact population for people with disability is 16% of the world's population, which means that every 1 person out of 6 people has a disability. Now, when we come to India, this is 26.8 million according to the 2011 census, and this percentage is that of 2.21%. Now, when we talk about this entire data, the picture that it gives to us is the number of people with disability that are a part of our country and how it gets unnoticed. Now, coming to the text that I'll be analyzing in this particular paper, which is No Looking Back. No Looking Back is an autobiography by Shivani Gupta, and it looks at her experience as a person with disability. So she acquired disability later in her life, and she started using a wheelchair. She is also the founder of Accessibility and an accessibility expert who works around this area of accessibility, specifically with reference to accessible infrastructure. Now, in this particular text, she talks about her experiences in India and when she goes abroad, like Bangkok and other places, how there's a disparity in her experience, at the same time, how she feels as a person with disability. So the literature that was reviewed for this particular paper constitutes of Cripps Write Back, The Rise of Disability Studies. This is a paper written by Leonard J. Davis, and it focuses on how in different literary genres, the people with disability are represented. He also talks about in this paper regarding the idea of temporary able body, how there is a complete dominant structure that operates in a society, and it is dominated by people who are able-bodied. The next article that was reviewed was Disability, Rhetoric and the Body. This talks about the use of language and how through language, identity of people with disability is constructed. So when we look or when we read this particular book, No Looking Back, it is written in rather a very simple language. It has almost no jargon, and it also has a few Hindi words in it. So we see how simplified the narrative of Shivani Gupta is. The next article that was reviewed was by Kauser, Conflicting Paradigms, The Rhetorics of Disability Memoir. This talks about how autobiography as a genre works for people with disability or people who are on the margins specifically, because when we talk about the genre of autobiography, Kauser mentions that all you need to do is pen down your lived life. So it's very easy that ways. You do not have to abide by any structure, any form. And he tells and discusses in this particular article how it is a major part and a counter narrative that they create through this particular genre. The last article is Disability, Life, Narrative and Representation. So it talks about the social burdens of disability and how it exposes the individuals to inspection, interrogation, interpretation and violation of privacy. Now, moving on to the theoretical framework of the paper. So there were 2 theories that are used for this particular paper, theory of ableism and critical disability theory. Theory of ableism is proposed by Fiona Kumari Campbell, specifically in her book, Contours of Ableism. And she talks, disability often quite unconsciously continues to be examined and taught from the perspective of the other. The challenge then is to invert this traditional approach to shift our gaze and concentrate on what the study of disability tells us about the production, operation, and maintenance of ableism. So we see how there is a dominance of able body in the social institutions. Specifically, when we look at it with reference to No Looking Back, we see how despite Shivani Gupta being a privileged person with disability, has to undergo a lot of discriminations. The next theory, critical disability theory, it looks at a very interdisciplinary approach, and it looks at the historical, relative, social, and political phenomenon specifically. Moreover, I would like to emphasize a little on this theory, because mostly what we do is when we talk about a person with disability, we often tend to use the term disabled
person and person with disability interchangeably. This theory looks at this idea very critically and tells when we talk about a person, a disabled person, we are prioritizing the idea of disability over the individual. However, when we talk about a person, or we use the term person with disability, we are prioritizing an individual over the disability. So these are the two theories I've used in this paper. Now coming to the analysis. So one of the major themes that I found while critically analyzing this particular paper was people with disability on the periphery. So when we look at this autobiography, the recollections, the memory part that interplays here, we see how people with disability are placed on the periphery. As Shivani Gupta writes, and I would like to quote, accessibility and inclusion of disabled people had to be looked at with the same seriousness as any other developmental issue. And it was essential to integrate it with all developmental plans and programs so that there were earmarked budgets to ensure accessibility. This shows how there's a lack of accessibility and inclusion of people with disability, and it shows how they are not a part of the mainstream discourse or the society. It also shows how people with this, like when we talk about the infrastructure, we keep in our minds, whenever our infrastructure is developed, we see who are the people who are going to be a part of it. So when we talk about an infrastructure or a place not being accessible, it shows how people with disability are not even considered a part of it. And when Shivani Gupta goes to Bangkok for her conference, she writes, she refers to the Indian context and how she saw disability in India and how she sees it there. So she says most of them in India, one is not used to seeing disabled people out on roads. Most of them remain cooped in their homes. So this shows how they have a very restricted place. And the very fact that she's mentioning these points is very political because it shows how restricted the lives of people with disability is. Coming to the next theme, which is disability, womanhood, and care. Now, when we talk about disability, womanhood, and care, it's very important that we look at these two ideas very closely. Now, when we talk about the idea of womanhood, the entire dynamics of how the institutional or the patriarchal idea of women is how we define a woman. Somebody who is supposed to give you care, somebody who is supposed to be like following the norm. Now, a woman with disability, that is the case, which is the case with Shivani Gupta, we see that there is first a double oppression. First, she is a woman. Second, she is a person with disability. So when we talk about idea like womanhood, we see that she's trying to defy the norms, specifically the social institutions also. As she writes, marriage at that moment was symbolic of society accepting me as I was, with all my shortcomings, just the way Vikas accepted me. I knew this was a result of his long but silent fight with his family to get me the acceptance I deserved. And I felt grateful for it. So when we look at this particular excerpt from the book, we see how marriage became a way of her acceptance. So the very idea of a woman being a woman can be seen in terms of these social institutions and the norms that they abide by. When we talk about a woman with disability, as Ghai also writes in her book, Rethinking Disability Studies in India, how women with disability are considered asexual and how these institutions are supposed to like affiliate to their identity, or they are not considered a part of it because they cannot go by this particular norm. Now, when we talk about the idea of care, it also completely changes when it comes to the women with disability, because women by default are considered to be the caregivers. Now, when we talk about this, when we talk about specifically women with disability, they are the ones who get the care. So in that case, the entire hierarchy subverts, and it also makes them a lot dependent. As Gupta again writes, the biggest challenge that almost each woman faced to accept herself now as a care receiver, while she had earlier been accustomed to the role of care provider within family. So it shows how dependent and how restricted it makes a woman when it comes to the idea of care. Now, to the last theme, which is memory and autobiography, it is very important that we look at the connection between these two, because when we read the text, if you read it, there are parts to it, and we see how the particular autobiography doesn't cover a lot of parts of her life when she was not disabled. It's only in recollections that she talks about her mother and her college life. She doesn't emphasize on it that much. However, she chooses to talk about her experience as as a person with disability. So when we talk about this particular thing, we see how she's using autobiography as a very political form of genre, and the role of memory here is very important as a shows. I am really sorry for interrupting. You have 2 more minutes to conclude the video. Yes, I'm just about to wrap up. So the process of recalling events and experiences from the past can be challenging, and specifically when it comes to an autobiography written by a person with disability, it shows how political this is, because it reflects on the discrimination and the instances that they undergo on a very regular basis. So I would like to conclude my paper here, and I would conclude by saying writing life is an aspect of accessibility that may seem secondary, but it is pertinent here because it is peculiar to disability. Thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am. And now I would like to request Siddharth sir to give remarks on Vidya's paper. So please.
Right, a wonderful paper, Vidya. Extremely. I mean, the topic itself has a lot of material, right? And of course, we are looking at it through two lenses, and you're talking about ableism, and you're talking about critical disability studies. And of course the intersection of gender, and I think that makes this text a very powerful text. I'll have to confess I have not really read this book, so I'm not in a position to really offer a great deal of comments or directions per se. But that does happen in a panel. It's possible that you've not read a book or two, and we have a huge diversity of texts which have been presented. I would like to congratulate the selectors for having sort of included so many different themes, which would include disability, margins, text from across the world, and sort of bringing in the question of trauma, memory, and what do you really do with it. One of the things about trauma studies is that it begins in some ways with the able sort of confronting the disabled, right? And particularly from war. So if you go to the sort of the roots of this entire business of trauma studies is the First World War, shell shock, PTSD. What do you do with it, right? And that sort of then veers around and comes back into many different disciplines, and you sort of say that, hang on, we have some space and we can talk about trauma and what do we do with memories and what do we deal with over there, right? And and as a way of sort of reconciling what to do when you have experienced that moment of great trauma. Even psychoanalysts like Laka, people who sort of refuse to go down the road of drugs and sort of trying to get patients to feel better in some other way, they sort of suggest that the best thing to do is to narrativize your experience, sort of speak about what has happened to you. And which is why literature sort of comes in and becomes a very important sort of space to interrogate what happened, figure out what happened, and sort of try and come to terms with it. I believe this was the last paper, Adiba. If we can now open out the set of texts to the audience, I think that would be fair. And if there are no further questions, I would like to hand the baton back to you.
Sure, sir. Do we have any questions from the participants, from the audience? Sorry. Or if the 5 participants want to cross question any point.
Excuse me. Hello.
Sure. Yes. Yes, sir.
Not just a question from me, but I just want my that professor's point is to. Could you please, Professor Bitsa, elaborate just a little the relation between trauma and identity, because it will be helpful for me.
Oh, sure. So Siddharth, sir, please.
I got, could you relate trauma and what? I couldn't catch that, the second word. Shan, could you repeat your question, please?
Yes. I mean, could you please elaborate the argument, the relation between trauma and identity, or whether my argument was right or wrong, or it was just like that? Because it will be helpful
Trauma
for
and
developing
identity,
on
I
paper.
guess, is what.
Actually,
Yes,
yeah,
trauma
yeah,
and
trauma and
identity is what he
identity.
said.
Yeah.
No, so one of the things is one of the ways in which communities sort of create identities is by recollecting a common trauma, right? So a common trauma becomes the mode of recollecting, collect, or sort of creating, let's say, because there often is no history, right? So a common memory of trauma becomes an identifying marker for uniting a group into a community, right? And that is often done even by nation states, and that is something which is done aggressively by, let's say, a country like Bangladesh, right? Which has to sort of veer between two very different positions, which it has, which its leadership has taken over the last, let's say, 60 years or 70 years of its existence, or break, or rather not existence, or its break from British colonialism, right? So, and there are other philosophers who would argue that this should not be done, including people like Tagore, right? And Tagore famously in his essays on nationalism says that it's only, those who are scared who go down that sort of a line. But the invocation of collective trauma is usually a mode for collectivizing, and then sort of creating mechanisms for selective resistance and selective enunciation of history, which has its own problematic, because you're already in the realm of propaganda and politics, right? You're no longer in the field of academics. You're not really in the field of what has happened, as much as you're in the field of what to do in the future and use what has happened, if you understand what I'm saying. So so one of the enunciations that happen in this sort of situation is that you try to, or what happens is other people seek to represent. Okay, so represent, like you are doing, you are representing the trauma of the Uyghurs, right, as a marginalized or as a subaltern group, but you have no clue what is happening in China. I'm sure you've never been to Uyghur provinces, and you don't really know what is happening. So we are now looking at a series of disparate, disparate uh, texts, which may have some common foundings, but you are joining in as a complete outsider, and you are trying to be that representative, for that group, which itself has its own politics, because in some ways you are not really doing anything for them apart from representing them in the academia, right? So these are problematic things, and these are things that Spivak will speak about, right? A desire to represent somebody else and improve them is also what leads to things like, colonialism and imperialism. And if you really think about it, the white kid, in 1870s, was asked to get on a ship and come to India and civilize all these brown people, thought he was doing the right thing. So where intrusion, representation, location of memories in sites, these are all a part of a certain way of dealing with the past and memory. Okay, and we have to be a little careful with it. I don't know if I've really answered your question, or whether I'm audible in totality, because to be very honest, you are only audible in every third syllable sometimes. Okay, so on that cautionary note, but I would like to congratulate you on taking a very relevant set of texts, and for trying to sort of grapple with these sorts of. In fact, all the participants have done a wonderful job of grappling with extremely difficult, polarizing, and emotive texts, which are sort of difficult to grapple with, without sort of coming up with affected reading, right? It's very difficult to read them in a critical lens in themselves. So a very wonderful job. It's great to see that new texts are coming in conferences, and again I would like to congratulate the selectors, and they've done a good job in selecting the text. There is an awareness of marginal voices which is sort of coming in, and I think that's really wonderful. I really think that some of these texts should now be pulled into our syllabi as well. We should start discussing some of these texts in the classroom. So on that note, Thanks a lot, and I would like to hand it back to Adiba. Right? Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. On behalf of our esteemed panel and the entire audience, we extend our heartfelt gratitude for your exceptional presence as the chair of our enlightening discussion. Your insightful contributions and invaluable feedback have enriched our understanding and elevated the discourse to new heights. Your expertise as a literature scholar and enthusiast shone brightly throughout the discussion, captivating our attention and guiding us through the intricacies of the literary world. Your ability to provide thought-provoking insights, coupled with your genuine passion for the subject, inspired us all to dive deeper into the realm of literature and expand our perspectives. Thank you all. Two wonderful participants who presented their ideas and floated new areas of discourses and added their papers to the topic of trauma, memory, and post-memory. This collaborative venture indeed added to the theme of the conference, and I look forward to many more such opportunities where we can come together as literature enthusiasts and share ideas. Thank you again for being such a wonderful audience who stayed and paid attention to each and every participant. With that, I would like to conclude the meeting. Thank you everyone for joining.